Welcome to Real Talk, where I give real answers to real questions from real worship leaders. If you are a real worship leader with a real question and you want a real answer, head right here and you can submit your own question and it might be on a future episode. Let's talk about it. I recently took some of your advice from previous videos and reduced our large library of songs from around 80 to 25 that we in our congregation all know and enjoy. I would like to introduce new songs throughout the year, but no more than maybe one every 6 weeks or so, if it's suitable. When introducing a new song, how often should we be adding that song to the set list? Should we have a surge of sorts where we keep this song on every week and every other week for a month or two? Would love to know your thoughts. Alex. I always get a little bit nervous when people say, I took your advice, and then I did it. It's like, sometimes when I make these videos, I'm like, are people actually listening to me? And then I realize that sometimes you are, and then you do the things that I say, and I'm like, I better be very careful about what I say, because people do the things that I say sometimes. So I think that this was a good move, though. So I'm not nervous about this. You cut your song list down from 80 to 25. And so now you want to introduce some new songs. And I just want to warn you, first of all, before I answer your real question, if you just keep introducing a new song every 6 weeks, eventually you're going to be back up to 80 songs in like a year or two, or however the math works out. So just be mindful of that. We don't always need to introduce new songs, or we can introduce new songs and take some of the old ones out. So keep that in mind as you introduce new songs in your church. And I've talked about introducing new songs a few times before, and I talk about why I introduce a new song, and I don't think it's ever a good reason to introduce a new song just because we need a new song. I think that there should always be a deeper reason behind it. So I've talked about before, we introduce a new song because it has to do with a series that our pastor is going through, or we introduce a new song because we find that there's like a hole in the theological diet of what we're teaching our church with our songs. So when you are introducing new songs, first of all, make sure you have a reason. Second of all, still, I would not recommend going over that 40, maybe bump it up to 60, but I think 40 is even plenty of songs. I did the math before, and what was it? That's something like, you have like 600,000 combinations of set lists that you could do if you have 40 songs to choose from, so there's plenty of creativity in that. Now, to get to your real question, you say, when introducing a new song, how often should we be adding that song to the set list? So what I typically do, and this isn't unique to me, plenty of people do this, or a variation of this, I typically do the song for 3 weeks, take a week off, and then do it one more time, and then the song comes into the regular rotation of my church. So, for instance, I just recently introduced the song His Mercy Is More by Matt Boswell, Matt Papa. So I introduced that song to my church. It was 4 weeks ago now. I did it the first week. People didn't know it, so they didn't really sing it, and I don't blame them for that. The second week, they had heard it before, so they sang it a little bit more that week. The third week, they knew it, and they were starting to sing it, like, intensely. And then I took a week off because it feels weird to me to do a song 4 weeks in a row, so I take a week off, give it a breather, and then it comes into almost like our regular rotation, but I always do it the 5th week, I guess technically it would be. And that way, people have heard it 3 times. We took a week off, so it doesn't feel like this is the new song anymore. And then I do it one more time, and then it's just in the regular rotation. So that's my rhythm. I feel like that's good. I think it takes probably more than 3, but at least 3 times of your church hearing and singing a song together for them to actually learn it. And then they probably still need even more time after that to learn it even better, because people don't come to church every week. So whenever you do a song for 3 weeks in a row, a lot of people in your church are probably only going to have heard that song once. So don't be afraid to do a song multiple weeks in a row. However, you also mentioned, should we do like a surge of sorts? So I guess that is my surge, but I wouldn't feel the need. You also talked about keeping it on like every week for a month or two. Like, I wouldn't do it that much. I think that that's a bit excessive. I think, like I said, 3 weeks on, 1 week off, one more time again, and then into your regular rotation. I've been leading the worship team for about a year. Previously, I was part of the team for several years as a vocalist. We have 4 teams with 4 seasoned worship leaders, which is great. There are then 13 other members. How do I get the leaders to buy into thinking about wider progression for the whole team rather than just focusing on preparing for Sundays? They're not keen on further meetings, and we can only support a full rehearsal once a month, supplemented with Sunday morning run-throughs. So it sounds to me like a culture has been built in your worship ministry, probably unintentionally, but it's been built, where you just show up on Sunday mornings and you lead worship. And now, and maybe it sounds like because you stepped into this newer role, I'm not sure how long you've been leading, but you stepped into this newer role as the worship team leader, so you're in charge of all of this now, and maybe that was the culture in place beforehand. A couple things that I think of. Number one, as of me releasing this video, we are still in the earlier part of the year. This is always good to do around when the new year comes, or you can even do it like when I would call like the fall ministry season kicks in, like after summer vacation's over and people start showing up to church again. I think that those are natural transition points in the church calendar to say, we're going to recenter, refocus, and move in a new direction because of the vision that I'm about to cast. So first of all, utilize those transition seasons to your advantage. Beginning of the year, fall ministry season, 2 great places to do that. Those are natural transition times where you can say, I want us to focus on for this season as we step back in to, a regular schedule, or however you want to phrase it. I want us to focus on this specific thing. So for you, you can cast that vision to your team and say, I want us to understand that we don't just show up on Sunday mornings to play worship music and then go home. And I wouldn't say it like this. So I'm trying to soften the blow. How would I say it? I would say, in this season, as we get back into a regular schedule, we're going to be doing things a little bit differently. One of those things are going to be more regular rehearsals, because as a team, I want us to be united together. I want us to have time to work on things that improve how we lead our church, so that we aren't just always flying by the seat of our pants and we show up and we hope that we know the songs, and speak directly to the perceived problems in your ministry. Because if you perceive it, I'm sure you're not the only one feeling it. So I just think of, and I mentioned flying by the seat of our pants, because I think sometimes, and this isn't true of all worship ministries, but sometimes when we just have Sunday morning rehearsals, people are unsure about what they're supposed to be playing, especially if you have just shown up on Sunday mornings and run through the song real quick and then led worship for an extended period of time, and you've never had a season where you have met for weekly worship rehearsals, like during the week you've had a rehearsal on Thursday night or whatever. I think people, and you can sense this for your team, but I think some people probably feel unprepared on Sunday, and maybe that comes across in how your band plays. So that would be a natural point. I'm just giving you an example. Maybe that's not a struggle for your team, but that's one angle you come at it from. Maybe you want to focus on building relationships with your team, and you're struggling to do that with just a Sunday morning run through. And this is why I'm a fan of rehearsals during the week, is because it's not just to run through our songs, but it is time for us to build relationships as a team. So if you just show up on Sunday morning, things are crazy, and you show up at 8 o'clock or whenever you show up at your church, and you run through the songs, and then you as the worship leader probably have 45 other things that you need to take care of before the service starts. And so you're like, okay guys, that was great. We'll meet again 5 minutes beforehand for prayer. And so your only relational time that you're building relationships with the people in your team is the time that you run through the songs, and then 5 minutes before your service starts. Where, as opposed to that, if you have weekly worship rehearsals, a rehearsal during the week, you can set aside time during your rehearsal just for relationships. You wouldn't have time for that on a Sunday morning because things are too busy, but when you have your own dedicated worship rehearsal night then you have that time. And that's why I put together the worship rehearsal blueprint. I'll link that down in the description below. But in that, you'll see, as I always talk about, we want to lead our teams well, musically, but also spiritually, and also relationally. And if we are just meeting on Sunday mornings, more often than not, depending on the structure of your church, but more often than not, we're only leading them musically, and we need to do more than that. And we simply, at least in the contexts that I've served in, I have not had the time to adequately lead people spiritually and relationally along with musically on a Sunday morning. So check out the worship rehearsal blueprint down below, and you can see how to structure your midweek rehearsal. So my advice, my ultimate advice, first of all, cast the vision that I just laid out in whatever specifics make sense to you, but don't just say, we are going to have midweek rehearsals from now on. Say to your leaders, the 4 other worship leaders, say, in this season, I want us to focus on being able to spend more time improving our musicianship. I want to focus on pouring into our team members spiritually. I want to focus on building relationships with our team, whatever of those 3 categories, whichever one of those your team and the context fits into for the vision of your worship ministry. Talk about that with those 4 leaders to get them on board, and then say, and the way we are going to do that is we need time outside of Sunday morning, i.e. a worship rehearsal during the week. So that's where I'm planning on moving our worship ministry as the leader. You are the leader. I like that you're actually the leader. Sometimes people ask me questions like this and they're just like the bass player. Nothing against bass players, but like, if you aren't the leader of your ministry, then you don't hold as much sway as you would if you were the leader. So you are actually the leader. So I say that because you have the authority to do this. And people probably aren't going to like it at first, and it's going to be a difficult transition, but it's ultimately the transition that you need to make as the leader in your ministry. If you actually believe that, then you will just do it. So cast the vision to those leaders, cast the vision then, once you get the support of those leaders, to the rest of your team, and then implement the plan and say, we're going to start this on this date. We're going to have our first weekly rehearsal, which will allow us to have time to focus not just on the musical side of worship leading, but also the spiritual side, and it will allow us to build relationships with each other. So like I said, if you need help structuring your midweek rehearsals, if you've never done that before, check out the worship rehearsal blueprint. Once again, it's linked down in the description below. It is a step-by-step plan for the perfect worship rehearsal that will lead your team well, musically, of course, but also relationally and spiritually, so that they grow closer to God and closer to each other. Other than that, thanks so much for joining me. Until I see you in the next video, keep leading worship well.